Hello and welcome to the panel 2 of organized by the AIED conference. So the name of this panel is Old AIED, New AI. What has changed, what still matters? And we will have a bunch of very relevant panelists today. So I will briefly introduce them, and if they want, they can have a word the first time they start discussing about what are their interests and things like that. So first of all, we have Irene-Angelica Chounta from University of Duisburg in Germany. We have Arthur Graesser, that many of you may know because he's one of the godfathers of the community from University of Memphis in USA. Carrie Demmans up from Canada, from University of Alberta, and Maria Mercedes Rodrigo, alias Didit, from Ateneo de Manila in the Philippines. And I'm Emmanuel Blanchard, one of the conference chair of AIED. Yeah, Emmanuel Blanchard, from France, obviously. So we'll be discussing this topic. We'll divide this topic into three, more or less, dimensions. And for each of these topics, I will ask the panelists to actually reflect on this. We will more or less spend 15 minutes on each of these topics. So the objective is to have enough time for interaction with the audience, because I know, having discussed this question with several of you, that many of you have interesting opinion about the topic of today. So the first one will be about creativity in AIED. So my experience, so I was in the community, my first AIED conference was in 2001, and then I left for 10 years. So what I was telling my comrade today is like for more or less, I'm like a time capsule. So between 2013 and 2023, I was no longer in the community. So it's like I had a certain vision of the community, what was being done, and when I came back, then came generative AI and so on. So this is more or less the reason for this panel. So as the creativity of the field expanded because of the additional popularity that it has gained because of generative AI, because of suddenly like AI in education become easy and so on, or is it actually the opposite? And then we will be discussing, following this first discussion, whether there are winners and losers in terms of topics being researched. And finally, like following those two first sections, we will be discussing about what is shaping the evolution of the AIED culture, like the culture of the AIED community over the past few years. So we will start with the first team, and I think like we already had a short discussion, so fortunately we have different opinions about this notion of creativity in AIED. We have two of the panelists, we kind of agree that it's still the same, so I will first ask Irene to give her perspective about that, and please go ahead. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Hi everyone, it's really a huge pleasure to be here. Thank you for the kind invitation among giants of the field, and then there's me. About creativity, right? My position is that we're not more or less creative. I think that our focus of interest in the field has shifted, and therefore creativity can be understood, interpreted, or expressed differently. In this sense, we are not more or less. I don't think we can quantify it like that, or good and bad creativity, right? But it's just different.
Hi, thank you again, Manu, for inviting me on this panel. My opinion is very similar to that of Irene. I think that there are some things, some aspects where we are more creative, and other aspects maybe when we're less creative or more challenged. I think areas like it's much easier for us to create conversational interfaces because of large language models, and so there's this whole class of problems that we can now sort of more easily address that maybe was much harder before. And what comes to mind is for example, my group is creating a virtual patient for our medical school, and this is not something I would have been able to do, let's say, 3 years ago. So in that sense, we have these tools to help us become more creative and about addressing this particular problem. But then there are other aspects that are more challenging, like getting the LLM to stick to the script, for example, and things like that. Okay, I will stop here.
So maybe art on a more positive view, I think like you are more positive about the evolution of the field, the evolution of the creativity of the field?
I'm definitely the optimist. I think with the increase in generative AI, we're looking at all sorts of questions, building things and tracking them, individuals building things, making things, groups making things. A lot of more creative questions to be asked. And I think that 21st century skills, we got a lot of research that needs to be done on tracking 21st century skills, whether it's collaborative problem solving or creativity or computational thinking. So I think this is a golden age of creativity. So I'm the optimist.
And Carrie, for the pessimistic view, maybe?
I am very much the wet blanket here. But I think just listening to the responses, I am defining creativity differently. So Didith was talking about it from the perspective of our ability to create things, and I was thinking of it much more from a conceptual perspective. So interesting new ideas, and what I've seen with Gen AI is not a lot of really creative new ideas for how to do things as much as the repurposing of this really great new tool that allows us to build things. But I'm not seeing the same kind of technical creativity where we're coming up with new ways of representing information or those kinds of things in the community. But this also has enabled us to work on a greater set of domains. So we were doing stuff with agents for teaching more than a decade ago. Like, Art, you've been doing that for, I want to say forever, but it's not actually forever. But now we can do it much more easily, and we don't have to create and come up with these new ways of doing it because someone has created something that allows us to do it fairly easily from a technical perspective.
So actually, I would like to come back to you, Art, about these 21st century skills. So what are they? Like you mentioned them briefly, and why do you think like that? To some extent, like this as like the optimistic view of like having so many more maybe research interests. Does it make you more optimistic that maybe we are losing those historical research interests to the benefit of this one, or is it like, how is the evolution? Like, is it just a shifting which is beneficial for the educational field, or is it something else?
Well, everybody knows about the hype cycle, right? And there's always a long tail. And so traditionally, people would identify certain topics to train people on, like physics or math, and that they made great strides doing it. It's comparable, if not better, than human teachers. And so you want to keep that, and you want to keep working on that. However, the 21st century skills, and there's about 20 of them that have been identified. You don't have courses on those. You somehow have to smuggle them in to whatever courses you do have. And so you need a bigger dosage for those. A 1-hour experiment is not the sort of study you do. It's got to be over a longer period of time, and you've got to be very creative in figuring out how to collect the right data for that. Yes.
So, having heard the positive view of optimistic view of art, maybe Irene, what do you think, like from your more balance?
I don't really disagree with Art, right? I agree with the positive view, maybe not so much with the non-positive view. And I'm thinking about the definition of creativity, right, that we were discussing earlier, and I think that's very important. If we discuss creativity as a novel idea, right, You can see it from the perspective of, yeah, you just went back in what we were doing in 2002, and you just do the same with LLMs, for example. Or you can see it as you're replicating with LLMs, but of course LLMs have different affordances, right? So you introduce new parameters and new problems that now you have to deal with that you didn't have 20 years ago. And that can be from a technical perspective, from a human perspective, human aspects perspective, or societal impact, right? So all the discussions that we now have for ethics, democracy, human values, well, we didn't have that discussions in 2000, right? Or maybe not so pronounced. And these discussions came because our technology became so powerful and introduced this novelty aspect that I call creativity.
Maybe follow up, Didit, maybe you want to add something about like the perspectives that have been shared so far, like the optimistic, the pessimistic view, like you, more balanced?
I think, well, I'm not sure if it's more balanced, but here's the thought. During the doctoral consortium yesterday, one of the doctoral students introduced me to the term epistemic vigilance, and that was the first time I had heard it, and I thought that was so beautifully phrased. And I don't know, Art, if it's connected directly to 21st century skills. I'm sure it's a version of one of the skills. But to connect to what Irene said also, this is one of those societal impacts that we now have to confront, that we have to teach not just students but ourselves how to be more vigilant about our, and not just sort of yield the decision making and the opinions and the judgment to AI. So that's, I think, yeah, I'm not sure, is that positive or negative? But it's just a comment, I guess.
And coming back to you, Carrie, I have to say, no, you don't want? Actually, I will. But I have to say, I tend to agree with you. Like, as I said, like I was a time capsule. Like I disappeared and I reappeared. And the community has changed, or maybe the interest of the community has changed. And one of the things, or maybe that's a big example this year with AIED having 12 different panels. So maybe the creativity is still here, but we can't see it anymore because it's so huge. There are so many forums for sharing ideas that actually maybe you are overwhelmed, but the creative is still here. Like, what's your perspective on that?
I think there's some truth in that, and I think part of what we do as researchers is we think about which community is most likely to accept particular work. So some of my stuff that might be more creative in an AIED domain, I'm not sending here. I'm going to send it somewhere else that's going to probably be more receptive to that work. And with some of those decisions, that might limit some of the creativity that we see.
Thank you very much. So we will move to the next questions. Thank you. So actually, like, there is an agreement at this stage between the panelists. Like, there are winners and losers, despite, like, is it optimistic, is it pessimistic, is it good or bad for the field? And maybe we could start from you, Carrie, again. What do you think about what are the winners in terms of research topics as compared to 10, 15 years ago, and what are the losers?
I think one of the big winners is language learning. The amount of effort that we have to now put into making things possible is just so dramatically reduced. Like, I was doing pronunciation work in 2007. It took me 2 years to build a system for, like, people saying single words, so incredibly limited. And now my students can pull something up within a summer easily, and it's a decent system. So I think we have a big winner there. I think where we have some losses is we've gone to a space where we're really valuing large-scale things. So those who are working in more focused, constrained environments are losing out because the numbers they're working with, the potential obvious impact isn't as visible to people or as valued. And because of the large focus on large language models, we're also seeing losses kind of in the valuation of other types of AI that work better in those smaller, more constrained settings.
So maybe, Irene, do you want to continue about your perspectives?
Yes, sure, absolutely. So in a similar way, right, I see as winners the topics or the areas that manage to adapt and evolve and grow as we progress technologically or even theoretically. Well, although our theories are more stable. So I see these topics as the winners, right, because they grow. And then we have some losses. I will not call them losers, right? I will call these losses, areas that didn't manage to adapt and they just somehow have left the proceedings, let's put it like that, right? So that could be, as you said earlier in our discussion, knowledge representations, concept mapping. I remember when I was a student, there were a lot of studies about concept mapping that I don't see anymore, unfortunately. Or sensor-free studies, video-based, affective modeling, and so on, that we don't see that often. So I would say these are the losses, and I'm kind of sad about it.
We'll continue in the same direction. Didit, what do you think are the winners and losers in today's AIED?
I think one of the winners has been things like the culturally aware tutoring systems. I remember, was it in Madrid that we had one of our early workshops?
In 2008, I don't think exactly, I think it was in Montreal, yeah, maybe.
Okay, but I remember there was one in Madrid, and
Yes.
and I think we had less than 10 people attend, and yet in 2026 here we had more than 40, and so many submissions.
And 2 years ago, we had 92.
Oh, there you go. So there's a lot more interest, I think, a growing interest in culturally aware tutoring systems. Also, there's always been sort of an eye out for under-resourced contexts. That's always been a theme, but now it's gotten louder and louder, especially because of the work of Seiji and Ig and people like Amy Ogan and Aaron Walker. I mean, these are people who have been with the community for a long time, and their voices have just gotten louder and louder in this space. The losers or the losses, I think, are actually it's similar to what Carrie and Irene have already said, that there's this preference for large language models. So if you have a language that has has a very small corpus, very small population, it's difficult to get representation for that language. And then I think there's those of us who do not have access to large funding opportunities are really sort of set back. And this may be funding from industry, could be funding from government, could be funding from foundations and so on. If we don't have access to that, to the millions of dollars or more zeros, then it's really hard to sort of break in.
But before coming to art, to some extent, at the same time, it's like doing AIED nowadays is cheaper than any time in the, like having computers. You can find very decent computer all over the world. You can do, you can use internet all over the world. So like maybe there will be a follow-up question about that. But before that, Art, from your perspective, what are the winners and losers in AIED those days?
Well, the United States has invested $250 million on these large NSF centers, and there's 5 or so of them, and these are large groups, multi-institutions, doing really imaginative stuff, in my view. And if you're part of that community, you're going to be a winner. Now, I've recently reached out to these centers and asked them about what it is that you're doing and who's doing it, and what new changes there have been. And all of them do have agents, and all of them consider a multi-agent architecture, where you can have an agent be a human or a talking head or a software agent, but exploring these multi-agent architectures, I think, are going to be some real winners, with each agent connected to its own large language model, that sort of thing. Now, the losers, unfortunately, are going to be smaller scale efforts. And days are gone when you can just collect a small sample of data and get it published in our journals. Qualitative research may be more difficult, small sample qualitative, unless the insights are just brilliant, you know. So I think that's going to be, so there is an issue, I think, that you need to divide the topics in our journals, at least, and I guess we're going to get to that in a minute, into a number of categories. So when these articles are reviewed, you know, the have-nots have a better chance.
Actually, that's very good, because a few of us were at the meeting of the AIED journal just before now, and actually during the meeting I had a reflection to myself, more or less following the comment of Irene. So I've been working in ontology engineering and formal ontology engineering 10, 15 years ago, and I was listening, so I didn't get, I know the editor is here, so I will ask him the opinion later, but I'm not sure that today AIED would accept paper on ontology engineering, because there is no evaluation. So this is a loser to some extent. Maybe, Irene, you want to continue in this direction, like knowledge representation, and I would like even to extend that to the full architecture of intelligent tutoring systems. When we had like the different modules and so on, is it still relevant? Because I remember that in 2024 there was a panel at AIED, and it was Alexandra who was running it, and I remember that she said maybe we can replace the whole architecture with generative AI, like to have all the different modules replaced by generative AI. So, Irene?
Yeah, no, we cannot do that. We had a workshop at the beginning of the conference on Saturday, where we discussed, you know, how controversial is an opinion that says, oh, we don't really need these traditional adaptive learning systems or intelligent tutoring systems or open learner models, because practically your LLM is your learner model, right? Your open learner model. You feed it with the activity, with the traces of the student. You feed it with the exercises, the content, the learning goal, and then it gives you practically all the feedback that the open learner model would give you, and that's, you know, a question mark here. And it's, you know, you don't need to design anything, you don't need to program anything, you don't need to implement anything, you don't need to spend, you know, effort and care in deploying it in the classroom. But is it the same? No, it's not, right? Because the thing about AIED is that it's not only about technology and cost and technological innovation, it's about doing that while stepping on rigorous pedagogical theories, right? So we're not just taking an LLM and put it in the classroom and then we explore the impact of ChatGPT in second language learning, for example, but we use theory like learning theories and pedagogy in order to design that so that it works. I took it somewhere else, right? Yeah. Your question. Okay.
But like it's good. Do you want to react to this, Carrie, maybe? Or I have another question, don't worry.
So my face said a lot, but it was because I thought Irene was going in a different direction than pedagogy first. I agree, we are a very pedagogy first focused community, or have been. I am seeing less of that, and I do hope that we reinforce the importance of pedagogy, because that, from any of the analyses we've seen historically and over time, if the pedagogy is not right, it doesn't really matter. No fancy AI will get it done.
Did you want to react as well?
I just wanted to really agree that and this is one of the things that scares me a little, because I had a conversation with Sergey, and I don't know if he's here in the audience, a few years ago. I think this was 2023, and we both commented that in so many words that we suddenly existed because thank you, ChatGPT, because but the danger was that, and so a lot of people felt like they suddenly knew AI because they knew ChatGPT, and so when we sort of, it was almost like being discovered, because oh, you know AI, and you know how to use AI in education, so you know how to use ChatGPT, and it was sort of very hard to explain that no, it's not just a matter of talking to this LLM, and I think that's one of the areas that I have to navigate, even my institution, that many people feel like they know AI because and AI can be applied as a salve on any problem in its sort of raw state. And the argument that we're trying to make is it does take more than that. It takes more thought than that.
And I would like also to come back to the expression that you used in the first question, art. I think it was a bit provocative to me. Like you said, it was now is the golden era of AIED. And when we were preparing, actually I was saying that the golden era of AIED was between 2000 and 2010. And for me, it's probably because what you say, Carrie, because there was so much wild techno-pedagogical innovation in those 10 years, or 10, 15 years, maybe it went a bit further. And art, like, do you maintain, and why do you maintain that like the golden era is now as compared to like those winners, those losers, and especially the pedagogical dimension that many people, actually not just the four of us, seems to feel that it's far less important nowadays in the community. Like, but maybe you disagree, maybe it's just that we see the top of the iceberg and there are a lot of innovation that we just can't read because 12 parallel sessions. So, Art, can you continue?
Well, I don't know if I'm exactly addressing what you want me to get at, but the people who are building tutoring systems with large language models have to have the conventional components. You need a domain model, you need a pedagogical model, you need a student model and a discourse model. And and I have a good colleague and friend, Sheng-Yan Hu, who builds a lot of these systems. And he thinks, well, he spends a lot of time on prompt engineering in order to have these components. So I think it's totally wrong, totally false that you can just have regular ChatGPT replace tutoring systems. I think that's more of a business hype, you know.
So at least we all agree about that. And a quick follow-up question. So one thing that we briefly discussed as well is like, since like there was so much innovation like back in the days, like, and we mentioned that when we were preparing this panel, one way for the innovation to come back, like there was lots of technological limitation 10, 15 years ago. Those limitations are dead nowadays, and we could more or less become creative with the idea of yesterday, actually. So what do you think about that? Irene, maybe you want to start answering?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think revisiting all the past influential research and trying to see what it would look like today with the technical affordances that we have. I think this is very important, right? I also want to make the point about cost. It appears to be so much easier now because technology is available and easily accessible, and it doesn't cost so much. So this will make it easier, you know, to revisit these older or past approaches and kind of redefine, you know, innovation or innovative approaches in our field in a creative way.
Thank you. Carrie or Didit, do you want, no, Didit, you want to continue? No, Didit, because Carrie gave you.
I was thinking about, sorry, I need a moment. I was making notes so that I could say something Okay. I think maybe on that point of it's easier to create applications, but maybe the difficulty of creating those underlying components that Art was enumerating, the student model, the domain model, the dial, the difficulty there has not gone away, I think. I think the difficulty is still there. So that's why there's a little bit of deceptiveness in just limiting our use to not this community, of course, but other, yeah. If we were to think of applications as, oh, let's just use an LLM, minus that foundation, then we kind of yield to that deception of thinking that it's good enough, because it's not good enough in its raw form. So.
Do you want to add something, Carrie, or we move to the next question? On the next point, actually was, so there has been evolution, like positive or negative, like that's debatable, but being interested in cultural evolution, like for my own research, like my next question to the panelists is like, what do you think has been driving the evolution of the field of the community over the past few years, especially during like the transition to generative AI, and what do you think will be the follow-up driving forces of the community? So maybe, Art, do you want to start?
Well, you're asking about the driving forces in the future.
If you want.
Okay. Well, the business and the world, the nation, the globe now loves generative AI. And we need to ride that wave while it's here and to do creative stuff with it. And part of it is to educate what we're doing to the community at large. And what we need is a good Neil deGrasse Tyson for AIED to go out and communicate this to the world out there, or to train all of us to figure it out how to talk to the press. So I think that we need to do, including identify the charlatans out there, those who are just really misleading the public on what the generative AI can do.
And calling them out, right?
So actually, since you were talking, Irene, do you want to continue? Carrie, you're
Yeah,
next.
so identifying the charlatans and calling them out, which is a very hard thing to do, right? But it is important. It's kind of our responsibility as a community, right? Sometimes I'm mind blown when, I don't know, I mean, so I have a role as a consultant on AI ed topics for the Council of Europe and for the European Parliament. And so I have these long meetings with policymakers. And I'm kind of mind blown that I mentioned the AI ed community, and they're like, no, we're not aware. So I think visibility is very important right now. Learning how to talk to the press. I think one of the forces is cost, right? Because now it seems that this is a business, right? It feels like a business. I also think that impact is a force. So it's good, you know, to make creative things, new approaches and so on, but things that have an impact, a societal impact, I will put it like that. And having said that, I would say that as we evolve when, you know, we grow. So I think that the fact that we had this year 3 different tracks, the technical, the human aspects, and the societal, I think this is evolution, right? So we used to come here, I don't know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, well, and we would see mainly computer scientists, and that's fine, that's nice. But now we come here and we see people with different backgrounds. So learning sciences, design, human-computer interaction, people who work with accessibility and so on. And I think this is very important because that's how societies evolve.
Carrie, do you want to continue?
I basically agree with everything Irene just said. There are a few people in our community who are doing a lot of work on impact, particularly in Brazil, and on getting things into schools. One of my frustrations when I'm in the room with government and policy people is sometimes they bring in like just the random deep learning startup, and then you're combating not just the policymakers' biases, but the agenda of this deep learning startup that has nothing to do with education, but that's still in the room. And I know from some of my colleagues who work in Nigeria and stuff, when they're doing things with policymakers there, they have community members in the room, but Google's also in the room. So the community members can't really say what they want to say, or they're not heard. So we need to do things as far as advocacy and kind of advice or applying pressure to make sure that the right people are in the room and some of the people who shouldn't be there aren't there.
Did it?
I want to agree with that because, so I'm from the Philippines and I was talking to some people from the Department of Education. So this is the government agency that oversees K-12 education. And one of the complaints that they had was that I think it's once a week, there are vendors who come and meet with them and demo the latest products. But the problem is that the teachers are not taught how to use the product. They are just shown the product. And they're not given help with, let's say, lesson planning, curriculum integration, much less monitoring and evaluation. None of that. It's just a demonstration of the product and a marketing pitch. That's basically it. So Carrie's point about having certain people in the room who really aren't thinking about education per se, but rather this is a marketing campaign for them. It's not really an effort to make education better, but it's something to meet the sales target, I think. And that's maybe where our role becomes even more important, to provide a dissenting voice or to put on some brakes when necessary. And to say that, again, to go back to Carrie's term, put pedagogy first. Like, how is this supposed to make the classroom experience better?
If I can go back to just, okay, sorry. To this point about teachers, one of the things, at least in the Canadian context, is that they teach teachers to use specific technologies. And I expect that's common in a lot of places. One of the things I'm trying to get our School of Education to change is to teach them how to assess technologies and map them to their pedagogies. Because they typically don't have the ability to choose what technology they're going to use. A school board or a principal or someone makes that decision, but they have to be able to figure out what's going to work in that technology for them and what isn't, and how they can adapt it to their needs. And that skill is far more useful to them than than them being taught Google Classroom or Moodle or whatever specific technology might be the rage in their particular jurisdiction.
So all your comments, like all your observation right now, have been made mostly about like the evolution more or less driven by the outsider, like the people who are not part of the community, of the AIED community and so on. And I would like to come back to those driving forces who are within the community. What has shaped actually the evolution of the community, what is shaping and what will be shaping the next 10 years of evolution in the community. So I know that we discussed a few of them. So we discussed, for instance, how do we select the research that is being accepted? How do we, like both in journals and in conferences, what are the value of the reviewers? And also the size of the community itself. I know that this is a concern for many of my friends at this conference. This is the first time that we have 12 parallel sessions, as we discussed before. It's very difficult actually to figure out where you can find the information that is of interest to you. and to some extent, like the experience that the new PhD students are having about the field is totally different than what we were having when we were a community of 200 to 300 people, where we more or less knew each other. So coming back to those like internal driving forces, like what do you think are those internal driving forces, and how can we make sure that they are positive driving forces? So maybe Art first.
I think we have been experiencing publication inflation. And I once had an idea, a hope, that wouldn't our lives be better if everybody could only publish one thing a year? You'd end up reading very well-written articles, and you'd keep up with what people are doing. You'd have a common ground. But, you know, it's hard to keep up. And now with the archive sort of publications, geez, there's a lot of stuff out there. How do you get to the right stuff? And I just wish there was some way of doing it, but coordinating common ground is important, and having nice ways of drawing in newcomers in our field. And I think our society pays a lot of attention to that with the doctoral consortium and the fact that there's proceedings here instead of just journals. You know, I think we do a good job on that, but there's a lot of knowledge out there, and I worry about I'm losing. There's a lot of stuff I don't know about.
Carrie, do you want to continue, or Irene, like the internal driving forces?
Yeah, just something that Art said triggered me. So imagine that you work in this for this one paper a year and then it gets rejected.
Well, actually, you don't have to. Everything's accepted.
Right. Oh, that would be nice. I can support that. And then, I mean, we should ask ourselves, why do we publish? Why do we feel the need to publish so much more, right? And it's because, you know, our students will compete for a postdoc position and their publications matter, so they need to have more. They will need to get a faculty position and their publications also matter, and so on. So we have kind of played along with this publication model that I agree with Art. It's really hard to keep up with, and it makes you wonder, does it really make sense?
Don't forget world rankings and promotion.
And I was, yeah, that too. So I'm thinking that the publication model that we have doesn't fit our needs, so most probably we should think of better ways to deal with that. And the other thing is about how we review also research to be inclusive, not only about different disciplines, but also about different areas in the world. And I will pass the microphone to you because it's your idea.
Thank you. It was an observation that I made because we are part of the editorial board of the International Journal for AIED. And one of the things I noticed is, so it's very difficult to get accepted if you, with survey research. And I'm not talking about literature reviews, I'm talking about survey research, meaning surveys about perceptions about AI, opinions about AI, usage about AI. So if you conduct a survey with teachers, even though it's 100, 200, 300 teachers, and you just ask them, how do you use AI or something like that, it's very difficult for us to accept something of that nature. And so when I reject papers of this type, I also notice the countries where the papers are from. And typically these are underrepresented countries that perhaps don't have the same sort of capacity to do AI research as certain other countries, such as the US or Japan. And so it's almost like we're deepening this divide, that there's certain countries or researchers from certain countries are more able to get into very good venues like AIED, and the countries that don't have access to the funding or don't have as much sophistication, don't have as much exposure or expertise, Perhaps that is the level of research that you're capable of doing, and they have very, very little chance of getting into a good publication like AIED.
So thank you very much. So I will open the discussion to the audience. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. And yeah, okay, Shad first. Imran.
Great, thanks. This is an awesome discussion. Thank you for doing this. I wish we had twice as many people in the room. I think we as AIED, we have probably a love-hate relationship with generative AI. On one hand, how can you not be excited by the capabilities and what's now possible? And then the flip side is the frustration that you all tapped into, which is now everyone's making tutors. Suddenly, they are everywhere. And we can usually find a lot of flaws in what we see out there. And so the learning and teaching modes on the frontier models, like we don't know what's behind that. We have no idea what research was used, if any, to put these in schools. And that's frustrating to us because as AIED, we've been going pretty strong since 1970 with Carbonell made Scholar to kind of start all of this off. So we have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of experience building these systems, and frankly, we want to be heard. And so I love your NDT idea, Art. I would like, so the first question was, are we seeing a decline in our creativity? Maybe the right question is, how creative do we need to be now? With these, Gen AI is a threat to the individual learner because they can just do their homework with it, but it's also a threat to us because now there's all of these AIED systems out there that are not, frankly, from AIED. And so I think, what other creative ways can we implement to start to combat these poorly designed tutoring systems and Gen AI-driven tools out there that are simply ignoring everything we've been doing for over 50 years. And so your NDT idea is a great idea. We put some stuff up on TikTok, 25-second videos, and had 40,000 views in a couple of days. Thank God someone in the Institute knew how to do that, because I don't know how to do that, but they did. But we need more great ideas like that. I don't have a question. I just want to hear what you think about how we can become more visible and manage our own growth and maintain our values.
That's a great point. I wonder if we could have a venue within our society of critiquing, very high-profile systems out of industry where it's not transparent. You don't know what it... Wouldn't it be nice to have somehow a critique or a blog to capture the imagination,
Can I add something? So yes, if you create this community, please call me. I like being grumpy. I think there's also kind of an identity crisis that we're facing because of that. So what we were traditionally doing, building intelligent tutoring system, building intelligent systems, right? Now somebody else claims to do that, and we're becoming an application area of AI. So yeah, that's something that I usually have to go through when I tell people what I'm doing. They say, oh, so you're an application area of AI. And I don't think that this is what it is.
Actually, I would maybe challenge you, Chad, on saying what kind of creativity, because I think nowadays, this is an excellent moment to be creative in our field, because actually the AI can do whatever we want once we have the ID. And there are new way of programming and doing stuff that are of high quality in terms of software development that are emerging those days. Some that are more local than they used to be 1 year ago. So for me personally, I had 4 projects that were on my desk for the last 5 years because I didn't have time, I didn't have engineer, or I didn't have good interns, or maybe I have an intern 1 year, but after 6 months he's over, and I have to wait for the next good interns. But now I see that like I can actually express my ideas and do the specification, and eventually like I will have my system, like if I do a bit of work, but I can more or less explore the theories that I wanted to explore in a way more free approach than maybe 10 years ago because of those technology. So I agree with the idea, but at the same time, it's both sides. Like so there are also some good opportunities for creativity as researchers. Anybody else want to? No. Any other questions? Yes.
So I was mostly wondering, that's a good point about critiquing apps, but I was thinking, would it be rather more productive to reward apps that are actually high quality in terms of education? So to rather have something adjacent to the venue as a competition for apps that are educational? And you know how a lot of startup founders are chasing awards? I think that an AIED adjacent award would be something that a lot of startup owners would be interested in having.
I'm wondering if Peter Hastings would like to talk about the idea we discussed yesterday night. Peter, I see you. So can you give the microphone to the gentleman?
I had an idea of something that our students at my university do from time to time. Peter Hastings at DePaul University. And lots of other computing students do this, a game jam or a programathon, hackathon. I was thinking we could have perhaps associated with the conference before or after a tutorathon sort of session for a few days and see how many maybe come together on topics and have used this vibe coding or something to just get people staying up all night and making tutors. That was my idea. And especially if it's in a nice place like a castle or something.
Yeah, because we were discussing castles in Germany. So basically making some sort of hackathon for creating intelligent system for education prior to, for instance, the AIED conference. So I see Didi taking the microphone. Maybe you want to react?
There is actually a competition called the Tools Competition that's run every year. So, and it has different categories. So there's a sort of a startup category, and then all the way up to an impact category where the prizes are quite large, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's incredibly competitive, so it's hard to win a prize, although I do think members of this community have won. But maybe that's something that can sort of incentivize this kind of creativity.
I think we can do I'm going to call it reviews idea rather than the like promote and diss. But I think we can do those reviews, and there are other educational technology communities that have that as part of their journal. So they take a technology, someone does a review of it for its various capabilities, and that goes out. And that might be something we might want to consider.
And just to follow up on that, one of the winners we also discussed and we forgot to discuss was were the simulated students. And in some ways, having a batch of simulated students could be more or less the evaluation data sets for this kind of systems. So I really liked your idea, Peter, so that's why I wanted to showcase your, your idea. Any other questions, any other comments? Some people there. Okay, many.
Hello, my name is Xinge from the University of North Texas. I have a question for Professor Arthur Graesser. I actually read your work over 2 decades ago when I was a student, so I was very excited when you talk about the Turing system. So you mentioned, for any like a Turing system, right? It's so important to establish the models first, right? So domain model, pedagogical, student model, discourse model. So I'm wondering nowadays in this large language model, right, OpenAI, is it still possible, I mean, to integrate these, create these models first, right, as a foundation? I don't think this will go away, even with the large language model. Yeah.
So, two things I might want to say. One is my colleague Shengyan Hu has been trying to do things like that, and he has a knowledge explorer to help people learn how to ask questions. He has Always AI to try to make the process of tutoring transparent, where you can see visualizations of that. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is I've been part of a community called Gift Tutoring. If you go to gifttutoring.org, there's a series of books over a course of 13 years. We get together experts to talk about some component of intelligent tutoring systems. And over 300 people have contributed chapters to this. So we get together, have a conference, and then we write a book a year. And Vasily Rus, a colleague of mine, and myself and Shengyan have been working with the Army in creating the gift architecture. And so I highly recommend you going to that source, gifttutoring.org. You can download these books for free and see what a lot of the people at this conference have contributed chapters to these books. Yep.
Sorry, Art, can I jump in and ask a question? No, because I'm teaching a course this coming semester on our AIED, and I was wondering, I was looking for a textbook that I could recommend to my undergraduate students. So these are not master's or PhD. And I did actually, because I have referred to the gift books several times, and I was wondering, do you think this would be a good source, a good reference or textbook or reference book for an undergraduate course in AIED as an introduction?
I think it's better for researchers. We do have the handbook of AI, that Ben and others, Ben Dubélé and others have done. And also we have this encyclopedia of artificial intelligence in education that is being written. I know Diego's part of that, and Santos, and one other person, I forget. Yes, So I'd start with those. For students, I think for creating intelligent tutoring systems, I think the gifttutoring.org would be a better place to go. Yep.
So there were lots of people wishing to ask questions. Okay.
I have a mic.
Go.
Hi, thanks so much. This is, I think, important and interesting. But my brain is hurting with a little bit of cognitive dissonance right now, which may be the jet lag. But, if you were here right before lunch, there was a presentation by the folks from Gemini. I don't know if they're still here. And it was a very nice presentation on their, basically a harness that went around Gemini. And maybe there was a pedagogical model, but there certainly wasn't a domain or a student model. But it achieved really remarkable results. And there was questions in the audience, but nothing very critical. So if you came out of that session, you would think these Gen AI tutors are the future. And so, Carrie, I appreciate your comment about reviews, but that was a place to ask hard questions. And they invited them. They said, if we're not looking at the right things, are they not doing the right tests? Is it not generalizable? Because I think that conversation could have happened and it didn't. And so I'm wondering what you all think and how do we start that? Because otherwise, on its face of it, it does look like those are winning out.
Thanks, Alyssa. So I think there's a really interesting thing with domain models specifically in LLMs. For a lot of domains, they implicitly have it because the training data has so much data from those different domains. So for high-level information, they usually have a pretty good representation. For some domains, they have really good representation of fairly nuanced data. So I think some of that depends on the area you're working in, and they might come with a reasonable enough domain model for a lot of forms of instruction.
And I could add something, so maybe it will be, I won't make it technical, but like there are alternatives to generative AI that are emerging, that the world models that are based more or less on a more natural understanding of the reality, the laws of life, of nature, and so on. I think that I'm not sure that they will achieve the same kind of success as generative AI, because right now they are especially focusing on vision and stuff like that. But this is an initiative that is especially dear to Yann Lequin, one of the Turing Prize. And this is an alternative that is worth in being investigated as a domain model and stuff like that in the future, I think, by our community. But like, I'm not sure where it will go, but that's also some things to investigate. Anyone? Any other questions? Yeah, okay.
Hi, thank you all so much for a really interesting discussion. I'm from the US, and something I'm really noticing a lot is a growing aversion and backlash to AI and modeling in general in the classroom. So I'm curious about what you think we can do better as a community to earn/regain the trust of teachers, but also deal with people who are kind of using this as an opportunity to capitalize on a political moment to kind of make a spectacle of it. Thank you.
I will start with this one because actually yesterday there was a very beautiful discussion in the first panel of AIED, and there was something similar to that. And my statement at the end of their presentation was there is something missing, I think, in the interaction between the industry and the teachers, the people like that, the parents as well, is value alignment. So it seems to me that sometimes, like when you hear Google or those big companies who are doing very great projects, they consider schools, they consider teachers, they consider students as products, which for me is true from a marketing perspective, but it's very dangerous also from a research and even ethical perspective. So I think this notion of value alignment, the fact that when you are a teacher, when you are the parent of a student, you know that the person in front of you providing you new services is actually doing it for the greater good. It's very important, and it's not always there. So I think, like in terms of adoptions, if you can convince for good reason that you are bringing your services for the greater good, then it changes things. But of course, like you have to deal with all those media frenzy about generative AI, and that's not easy, and that's why also the previous part of the discussion about having some sort of the Graesser of AIED would be also very important. That how do you show that, like, of course, there is evil AIED maybe, but there is also good and benevolent AIED as well, and that's not easy actually.
To add to what Manu said, I think what companies need to do is to show measurable benefit to the community that they're trying to serve. Because, yeah, as you said, they look upon us like products, so or markets. So they're trying to sell us something, and all the benefit seems to be for them. If I may share one anecdote, I'm not going to name the company, but during the pandemic, we were approached by a large MOOC provider, and we were under the impression that they were going to ask us for content that they could put on their MOOC. So I was invited to the meeting. I was not the point person, but I was brought in. So I talked to the point person and I said, are they selling us a product or are they asking us to contribute? And he said, well, as far as I know, they're going to ask us to contribute. I said, okay, then I agreed to be part of the meeting. And when we were there, so the point person from our university had spoken to the external provider and had made it clear that we were interested in contributing. And so we stepped into the meeting. This was on Zoom, and the guy just went on this whole marketing pitch for 20 minutes. And to his credit, our point person kept sort of interrupting and saying, can we get to the part where we can actually contribute? And he was essentially just selling us courses that were pre-made. And he was saying that, oh, you know, your students can take these and you don't have to open the classes on campus anymore. You can just use these. So that was, I think, a little too sort of in your face about just buy our stuff. All right. So I think that if companies wanted us to feel like they cared, then show the benefit, show a measurable benefit, show sort of an inclusion as well, that we aren't just selling to you. And then there's the and this is something that a lot of companies that we deal with don't quite get, is education is more than just developing skills, but it's also about formation, about forming functional, beneficial members of society who can do good in the world. And but the thing is, the approach to us in the Philippines is really that, oh, we need employees. So you need to teach them, you know, whatever it is, whether it's Python or whether it's, way back it was things like Keras and all these, and that was the approach. So we felt like they didn't care about our students as people, they cared about our students as employees. So it was very hard to kind of buy into that. But at the same time, I understand where they're coming from, but I also see the dissonance between where we're coming from and then where they're coming from.
I think some of the pushback is also about value alignment. So for the first time ever this summer, one of my incoming high school students who will be doing research for this summer sent me an email saying, I don't want to work with LLMs. Can I please have a project that doesn't involve AI? And I said, yeah, sure. I've got other projects. It'll be okay. We can make this work for you. But if we look at large international surveys, we're seeing around 20% of students in that 17 to 23 range who don't want to do anything with AI. And it's not even really privacy. A lot of it is ecological concerns. But there are other groups I work with where it's about things like data sovereignty and how their data has been misused, or a misalignment with how AI will represent their language and their beliefs about how their language should be used. And sometimes the right choice is to not use AI. And that has to be a valid answer that we accept from people.
There is a use of generative AI that I hope to see more in the future, and that's where they make things. They use it to make things, collaboratively or individually. And it empowers people who have writer's block, you know, a lot more can create things. If people see that sort of benefit, I think more and more people will be less skeptical about it. That's the hope. When they can see it empower them in creating things, then hopefully some of the bad stigma will go. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for such a nice discussion. I'm Reza from Twente University, Netherlands. My question relates to the second topic. So we are in an era that every almost 90 days, there is a new language model with new affordances. And I define winners among research topics those topics that are not going to be outdated very soon with the emergence of new technologies. I'm very curious about your opinion. What do you think? What are the winners in this very evolving era that every now and then we have these new technologies? What are the topics that won't be outdated very soon? And what are the losers, on the other hand? Thank you.
Actually, I will start very quickly on the for me, it's not necessarily a topic, it's more a method, it's abstraction. And this is why if you abstract the functionalities of the needs of education, stuff like that, so at some point you need a model, at some point you need LLMs, maybe you will need some other kind of deep learning approach. So if you abstract whatever you need for positive education, this kind of feature of positive education, they would be here in 10 years, and you don't care, you can implement them in a certain way this year, and in 10 years, those needs will still be here. Like for instance, more social interaction, human social interaction. This is something that education, as we said, like education is not about learning skills only, it's also about interacting, socializing. So there will be still this need. And so if you work at the abstraction level, this will be still here in 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I would say theory-based approaches, methodologically rigorous approaches, I don't know, some topics from the top of my head because I work on them. Learner modeling, right? I think it's safe. And we have seen that over the years because it's theoretically grounded and based and, you know, it practically, it doesn't change based on the technology that you will use.
Anybody else want to? Okay. There was a question here, yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Vasile Rust from the University of Memphis. Denmark announced recently they are going to switch back to pencil and paper in schools. They have two major arguments, decline in academic performance and increase in mental issues. Can you comment on that? Is technology always the answer, or the technology was badly designed, or what's the... Any comments?
If you, well, I go to Oxford University every once in a while, and their exams are oral. They have a special building where all the exams are taken, and it's an oral sort of thing. Well, that'll be impossible to implement. Now, writing, there may be a way of implementing it without paper and pencil. And actually, Shengyan, I know, has this approach. A student turns in the paper. You wonder if they just got it from ChatGPT, okay? So what they do with the computer is have text-generated questions about their paper, and they have to answer it within like 10 seconds. So they wrote the paper, they should know what's in there, and if they can't answer a question and it's all done digitally, then they probably didn't write it. So techniques like that, I think, might be done. Tricky techniques, yeah.
So there is something actually I would like to come back to the position of Chad at the beginning. Is I think like the position of Denmark in some ways is due to the fact that it's not necessarily AIED from this community that is frightening them, but this is the AIED that they have, like, because we are not visible enough with our research, with our like methods, and with our analysis of what's working, what's not working. So eventually, the general audience, they do not know our community so well. Like they know people doing AI on education, but those people, they started doing AI on education maybe 2 years ago. And they don't have the depth, the theoretical depth that this community has developed over like almost 40 years. And sometimes, like when I read the reason for rejecting AIED, so I totally agree with those reasons, because those kind of systems, they are totally abnormal from the perspective of a researcher in AIED. But that's the kind of system that the general audience, like the general population, has access to, and that's the kind of system that they use to evaluate AIED, but not the AIED community. And that's what the stakeholder use to make decisions right now. So is there one last question? Yes.
I'm Ali from Brussels. I have a comment and a question, so I'll start with the comment. I think going with the generative AI is the, let's say, the nature way of how machine learning is evolving. We start with the neurons, then layers, then a deep learning models, then 2 deep learning models to have some generative AI, and now it's generative AI, and with agents, multiple generative AI models. So I think it's the normal way or the nature of, and that's not what I'm saying, it's from Keming, the person behind Resonate. About my question, it's about the creativity, maybe because I'm relatively young, and all of the stuff when we talk in the past, it was better or we were more creative. This nostalgic sense, I don't know if it's correct or not, because now AI is making things easier to build, but also it brings a lot of problems with it, yeah? Because now students can do stuff very quickly, but do they learn? This is a big problem that we are talking about. So my question to the panelists is the question, are we creative today compared to 10 years ago, is just a nostalgic way of when you are a small community and you know each other, or is it a true question about creativity? It's very clear that I'm directing my question to the pessimistic person in the panel, but yeah, it can go to that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't think I was looking at it from a nostalgia perspective. I do think, how do I want to put this? So just because I don't think we're more creative doesn't mean I don't think we aren't doing really good, valuable work. And there are multiple components to work. And there's a lot of stuff that goes into getting systems into schools, getting them used so that they're benefiting people that isn't creative, but it is incredibly valuable. So it's not always bad to be less creative. I have a bias towards really solid work rather than really novel work. That is my own bias. And some people will disagree and think that that's bad. These are personal value trade-offs, and we all have to make decisions with respect to where we want to put our effort and our energy.
So we are already over the time, so maybe 1 minute takeaway, like what do you think is, like what do you think will be the path or should be the path of the community for the next 10 years? What should be, like what should we aim for? What should we do to improve maybe generative AI? I don't know, but like what is the next, if you had one thing to do, what should it be?
Find ways to improve metacognition as we develop these, where people can scrutinize truth, critique things, critical stance, or that other epistemic vigilance, or whatever it was. I think you have to do that along with everything, and it's intensified.
Carrie? I really like Chad's thing about the TikToks and stuff. I do think we need to do more of that outreach and work on implementation.
Irene?
Yeah, work on impact, societal impact.
Beyond just the community.
And maybe a very specific use case of impact is impact in developing countries or communities that are under-resourced.
Very well. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for the panelists, and see you at the coffee break.
And thank
Hello and welcome. This is the Professor Ram Kumar, Educational Data Mining Test of Time Award discussion panel. Thank you for coming today. We have a few things that we're going to do here. We're going to talk about last year's winner, as is the tradition in EDM. The Professor Ram Kumar Educational Data Mining Test of Time Award is created by, as the namesake of the award itself, is given annually to a paper published in one of the educational data mining venues. So either the Journal of Educational Data Mining, the Conference of EDM, or an EDM workshop prior to that conference, even reaching further back when before EDM was its full-fledged conference. The eligibility of these papers must have been published at least 8 years prior to receiving the award, and it's typically awarded by a committee of leaders in the field, selected by the board of directors. And really what this award is meant to do is honor the works that come out of this, the EDM community that have, as the name suggests, stood the test of time. So these are works that have had particular impact and influence within the field, and are continued even today to continue to receive citations and acknowledgements and references, helping to kind of shape, even as methodologies change, as technologies change, these papers still remain influenced. They've stood the test of time, as the name suggests. As I mentioned earlier, the typical convention or the tradition that EDM has followed is that each year a new award is given, and at the end of this session today, the 2026 award will be given and named, but this session here is meant to honor and recognize and discuss last year's winner. So the 2025 award winner of the Test of Time Award was Metrics for Evaluation of Student Models by Radek Pelenek. And unfortunately, Radek was not able to be here in person with us. So instead, to be able to honor this, his work, we will hear from him in a recorded form, but we will also then have an extended discussion of that work as it pertains to how it has had influence in the past, as well as how it continues to shape influence from a set of esteemed invited panelists. So I will invite them up, and I'll say a few extra words as I invite them up later, but just as a quick snapshot, we will have a discussion after we hear from Radek. We'll have a discussion from Gautam Biswas, Nigel Bosch, Thomas Christie, and Tanya Kaiser. But to start off introducing the paper itself and the work itself, luckily we do have a few words from Radek. So if you'll bear with us here, I'll cross my fingers that the video will play correctly and sound will work. But we will first start by hearing a brief presentation from the author himself.
I'm from University in Czechia, and I'm honored to be awarded the EDM Test of Time Award for the 2015 paper Metrics for Evaluation of Student Models. Unfortunately, I'm not able to participate in this year's Education Data Mining Conference, so I would like to share my reflections on the paper, at least in this form. I will start with the original motivation, how I got to writing the 2015 paper. The motivation came from practical experience. I've been experimenting with skill models for adaptive choice of questions, and I needed to choose one of them for actual application, practical application in the product that we have been developing. Based on my familiarity with the research in an EDM conference, I have known that people have been using the root mean square error metric and area under curve metric among other metrics, so I picked these two. For my evaluation, I ran experiments, and I ended up with a different winner with respect to each of these metrics. And now I needed to choose one of the models for the practical application, and I didn't know which one to choose. So I started thinking about which of the metrics is more appropriate for my case. I have tried to find advice in research literature in EDM, I didn't find EDM papers, I didn't find much advice, so I looked at different domains like weather forecasting, and based on these experiments, experiences, thinking about metrics, looking at their properties, I've ended up writing a summary paper about this issue. So the performance metrics in student modeling are used to a number of ways, particularly for parameter fitting and model comparison, and there are many of them. This is just a sample of some of the metrics that you can meet in research papers. What I mean by performance metric is that these are metrics that help us quantify the quality of predictions. So we have some, we observe some outcomes. For example, student answered correctly or incorrectly, or student state, like student is bored or is not bored. And we have some model which provides predictions of the state. The outcomes in general can be of various forms, binary, multi-class, or even continuous. In the case of student modeling, most often we work with binary outcomes. Correct, incorrect answer, student state is bored, is not bored. And the predictions are numbers between 0 and 1. In the paper, I provided a division of the different classification of different metrics into 3 types: probabilistic understanding of errors, qualitative understanding of errors, and ranking of examples. With probabilistic understanding of errors, we understand the predictions as probabilities and treat them as such, for example, using the local likelihood method, or another typical choice of this type is root mean square error metric. With qualitative understanding of errors, we apply some threshold to the predictions, so we end up with binary predictions. So we have binary predictions and binary outcomes. Based on these, we construct a confusion matrix, and based on the values in the confusion matrix, we can compute unidimensional metrics like accuracy, precision, recall, or their combination. And the third type of metrics is exemplified by the area under receiver operating curve metric. Here we focus on relative ranking of predictions. The receiver operating characteristic curve is given by plotting false positive rate on one axis, true positive rate on another axis. For each possible choice of threshold, we get different combination, and area under curve summarizes the whole curve. In the 2015 paper, I provide some arguments about the natural mapping, in my opinion, natural mapping between different uses of models and different metrics. I argue that for skill modeling, where we are trying to predict the correctness of next answer, natural choice is one of the metrics with probabilistic understanding of errors, right, root mean square error. For affect and motivation, where the models try to predict the student state, like bored or confused, it seems natural to use qualitative understanding of errors with binary predictions. And I also provide some arguments why the area under curve metric, which has been traditionally used quite a lot for student modeling, is actually not a natural adept for the models. And also I provide some arguments based on the literature from other domains why the area under curve may not be a really suitable metric. So the main summary of the 2015 paper was, one technical point was concerned with mean absolute error, a specific metric which has been used in several research papers, but I provided specific technical arguments why for binary outcomes it can be misleading and provide completely wrong conclusions in some cases. So I provided some technical arguments why mean absolute error should not be used. With respect to area under curve, the situation is more complex. Here I provided some arguments, partially subjective, why I believe it is overused and should be used more carefully. And my recommendation was to use as a default metric root mean square error. But the more important high-level point was that the choice of metric deserves more attention that is currently getting, and that other domains can provide useful inspirations, particularly, for example, weather forecasting, where they have been doing probabilistic predictions for a long time, and they have thought about evaluation quite a lot. In the following years, I continued some of this line of research. Most of it was written down in a journal paper in user modeling and user interaction in 2018, which dealt with other methodological nuances in the evaluation of student models. The paper dealt with several of them, for example, with attrition bias and such things. Here I would want to highlight two of the issues discussed in this paper: averaging in matrix computation, which directly follows up on the basic overview of matrix, and then with issues about cross-validation and data splitting. Concerning averaging, the discussion so far concerned global computation of the matrix, but in student modeling, the data has some structure. We have students who are answering items divided into some knowledge components. And the basic computation of performance metrics just ignores these structures and treats all predictions and observations as the same. But we can also pick individual students, compute root mean square error for individual predictions for individual student, and then average these predictions. Or we can take knowledge component, take all predictions for these knowledge components, compute quality of root mean square error for this knowledge component, and then compute average across knowledge components. Each of these approaches effectively gives different weights to different observations. None of them is inherently correct. Each of them has different advantages and disadvantages and different uses. And each of the important point is that each of them can lead to different numerical results and also to different comparison of models. In the follow-up journal paper, I provided some specific situations illustrating how the choice of the averaging can influence the comparison of models. And this seems like a nuanced point. Often this issue is not properly reported in research papers, and yet it can have non-trivial effect on the results of evaluation. Something similar happens with respect to data splitting. In the evaluation of models, we typically divide the data into training set and test set. And this division can be done in different ways. The simplest is a uniform division where we just randomly divide the data into training and testing set, but we can also respect the structure of underlying data. So for example, we can care about generalization of the model to new students or new student populations. So in this case, we may split the data, we may use student level stratification, where some students are completely in the training set and some students are completely in the test set. Or some student subpopulation is completely in the test set. Or we can be interested in generalization with respect to new items or new knowledge components, and in that case we put some items completely into the training set and some items or some knowledge components completely into the test set. Various researchers have used various approaches. Some papers report which of these have they used. Some papers even do not report what approach they are using, which complicates their application. We have to guess whether they have used uniform division or some other kind of stratification. And again, these choices may non-trivially influence the results of evaluation. Another aspect of the cross-validation methodology is whether the predictions are updated dynamically or they are treated statically. The simple approach is that you take the train set, train the model, and then compute all the predictions for the test set based on the train set, the trained model. More realistic to practical applications are dynamic predictions, where after observing each new observation, each new answer for a student, for example, we update the model and recompute the predictions. This corresponds more closely to practical applications, so one can argue that this is the more natural and correct approach. However, many papers are using this approach because it makes the evaluation easier, particularly for models where the updates of the models are computationally expensive. And again, the choice of the evaluation methodology can non-trivially influence the results, and it's important to pay attention to this aspect. So, to conclude, I would like to offer some of my comments on the progress of the field after the publication of the paper in 2015. These are clearly subjective notes, how I see it. My impression is that the choice of metrics now gets more attention than before. For example, it's more common, I think, to see usage of multiple metrics, not just one of them. And when there is a mismatch in the results between the different metrics, the researchers typically provide some commentary on the differences. However, the details on the rationale of specific metrics, specific subset of metrics, I think is still quite rare. Researchers typically do not provide arguments why they believe these metrics that they have chosen are relevant for the task that they are solving. And my impression is that there are still many cases where worrying usage of metrics persists, particularly in the deep knowledge tracing research. Many of the deep knowledge tracing research pay a lot of attention to the technical details of the neural networks that they are using, but then the evaluation methodology is described only briefly. They often use a single metric like the area under curve, to which I'm skeptical, and also the cross-validation methodology often seems to be simplified to fit the models because the neural network models are often hard to train and update. So my impression is that the evaluation methodology often is done in such a way that it fits the model, but not the practical application where the models should be used. So I believe that there is definitely a scope for improvement and for more proper evaluations of this research. To conclude, I will just repeat the summary of the 2015 paper, which I believe is still relevant. I still stand behind my recommendations not to use that much error on the curve, to rather prefer the root mean square error, and preferably to think more carefully about what is appropriate for a particular situation. And I definitely stand behind I think the general point that the choice of metrics deserves more attention is still valid even in 2026, or more generally that the evaluation methodology deserves more attention. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. I thought that camera was going to follow me for the rest of my life. So we've heard now from Radek himself. What I would like to do is I will invite each of the members. I'm going to say just a couple of words, so as I introduce you, if you don't mind joining me on the stage. But first, I'd like to introduce our panelist, Gautam Biswas, is a Cornelius Vanderbilt Professor of Engineering and a Professor of Computer Science and Electrical and Computer Engineering at Vanderbilt University. A former Test of Time recipient himself. His work focuses on AI and machine learning, focusing, of course, on AI in education, learning analytics, and the learning sciences. So let's welcome our panelists as we invite them. Joining us as well is Nigel Bosch, an associate professor of information sciences and educational psychology at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. His research concerns machine learning approaches to measurement and the novel research directions in the types of these measures enable. Thomas Christie leads Renaissance Philanthropy's Engineering Hub, which provides technical support and advice for mission-driven educational technology projects. And before Renaissance, he spent over 10 years in educational technology, applying ideas from cognitive science and AI for the benefit of students, and also previously taught math in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And finally, we have Tanya Kaiser, a professor at the EPFL School of Computer and Communication Sciences and head of the ML for Ed laboratory. Her research lies at the intersection of machine learning, data mining, and education. And before joining EPFL, was a senior data scientist with the Swiss Data Science Center at ETH Zurich. And I will join you at the table, so bear with me transitioning. Let's see, does this work? Oh, perfect, perfect, seamless transition. So thank you all for joining me here in this panel discussion. So now that we've heard a little bit about Radek's work, what I'd like to do is just kind of open it up. I have a couple of guiding questions, and then after we've heard from each of the panelists through 2 guiding questions, we will open it up to the audience. So be sure to also think about questions that you might have to learn more about the insights that our great panelists can provide in this area and how it relates to other aspects of the work that might be going on at EDM. So the first guiding question, and maybe what we'll do is just kind of go down in line in order. So the first guiding question is on looking back. Radek's paper argued that the metrics that we use to evaluate student models are not merely technical reporting choices. They can shape what we conclude about which models are better and what kinds of models we build and how models are used in educational systems. So looking back over the past decade, where do you see this work having had the most important impact on EDM as well as its related communities?
Hello? Yeah, working? Thank you. So I think this paper is quite influential. It made us realize that, you know, in EDM research or in AIED research, we use a lot of metrics, but we often report these metrics in a very inconsistent manner. So we don't often, you know, we choose a metric, our favorite metric, use it for evaluating whatever construct that we are interested in. In this case, Radek was evaluating student models. But it turns out that you know, we don't compare metrics because each one of the metrics has certain positive characteristics and negative characteristics. And if we just choose one metric, we are biasing our results. But by comparison of metrics and knowing the strengths and weaknesses of metrics, we could then get a much better idea of the construct that we are trying to represent. So one of the key points that he made in his 2015 paper was a single metric is a simplified view of model behavior, so it's really important to consider and compare different metrics. And the other thing he pointed out that I think is extremely relevant and relevant nowadays too is we all work on somewhat different applications, but very often we don't think about how the metric relates to a particular application. So so the use cases we choose should govern the use of metrics. Sometimes we don't really try and make those strong connections between them. The other thing in the paper was he compared a number of metrics, pointed out the strengths and weaknesses of a number of them. We can get into more details about that later. So I think the paper made very important contributions that are still relevant today. Maybe not the specific terms, but then the approaches that he proposed. And the last thing I'll say that I liked a lot is he picked metrics that are used in other fields, like the Brier metric that he talks about and points out comes from the forecasting field. And I think it's very important for us, especially when we look at probabilistic and statistical measures, that a lot of work has been done in many different fields, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we are working in EDM. Thank you. Hope I didn't go too long.
All right, I'll go next. I think this paper, which I reread last week in preparation for this, is still a great paper. Strongly recommend it. I think it still has some lessons for us, and especially as Radek mentioned in the talk today about probabilistic modeling. And I think there's been there's still a lot of work on probabilistic modeling in the EDM community, but yeah, I think there are still a lot of lessons to learn about non-probabilistic modeling that I don't see as much uptake of in the EDM community, but which are the lessons are still there potentially to learn from this paper. So I would suggest to read it. But I also looked a bit at what papers have cited this paper. And there's quite a bit of stuff from different fields, actually. So other people are doing what Radek did and looking at what we are doing and how we are evaluating our models and using this paper to justify their own choices about what metrics to use for modeling. So I think that's really great and also something to keep in mind for our own work. But then last, I also wanted to mention that it also certainly influenced me personally. I know with Luc Paquet, who's also here, we wrote 2 papers about metrics after reading this one and focusing on different kinds of problems still in the EDM space, but different metrics in different parts of model building processes. And so I think it had a lot of direct impact for me and also transitive impact through the work that all of us do in our field and even other fields.
I am grateful that this paper was chosen for this, to highlight this particular contribution. And mainly the reason I'm grateful is because I think we still need to hear it as a community. I think the message is important. And I mean, I found myself citing this paper working on something just a few months ago because I think it's just as relevant today as when it was written. I also think it was interesting that 2015, when it came out, was the same year the first deep knowledge tracing paper came out. And so there's a countervailing force. You know, that used AUC, if I remember correctly, also as a quality metric. And so there's a pressure to replicate that finding, to improve AUC with that same data set, but also this sort of countervailing pressure to consider a broader range of metrics. I think we would do well to heed the paper and sort of consider the meaning of the metric. I mean, specifically, I've been thinking most recently about, you know, AUC being a sorting metric, essentially, that is sorting probabilities, and it doesn't include any calibration information. But I have seen more papers recently include both AUC and like expected calibration error, and perhaps that's a benefit that this paper's made to the field.
Okay, last one, what to add? I would say I'm certainly one of the people that cited a paper a lot because I did a lot of probabilistic modeling in my PhD and postdoc, and that was a very relevant paper. So for me, the main message is what Radek put as main message, that we should think about metrics. And I think another thing that we should think about is sometimes this metric also evolve a bit naturally. So let's say you're doing a deep knowledge tracing paper and then you're doing a modeling paper, so you will have to benchmark against the previous approaches, and the previous papers might have used AUC or whatever metric, so then the choice of metric that you use, so naturally in a field somehow you're all expected to use the same metric to compare, and it is also very hard as an author to say, oh no, I will use a different metric than anyone else did, just how the academic system works. And that's maybe also something we should think about. How do we encourage thinking about metrics and how we evaluate models instead of just all running with how it organically evolved?
Thank you, and that brings us to our second kind of guiding question that I'm curious what your thoughts are, and let's mix up the order. I hope I'm not going to throw a wrench in things, but we'll go kind of backwards so that Tanya doesn't always end up with the last word. But the guiding question too is now looking forward. So of course a lot has changed in the last 10 years as student modeling and educational modeling continue to evolve. So that includes of course large language models, deep learning approaches, multimodal data, affect, engagement modeling, models used to drive real-time interventions. What lessons from this paper should guide the field going forward, and what have you already seen kind of emerging either among the works either being presented here or that you're familiar with that have emerged as what you would consider as kind of novel and the works that are going forward? Tanya, please.
Okay, that was a very long question. So yeah, I think we have certainly emerged from binary prediction of knowledge to multimodal data, and right now with large language models, so a lot of the tasks that we are now doing, they involve some type of modeling, but also some type of text generation. And so what I think the lesson that we should learn from this paper is that there should be evaluation. I feel like this has improved over the past 3 years since LLMs first came out, but I still wish that there was more evaluation in general. I'm not even saying what metric to use, but just more rigorous evaluation of the model and components in general. So if you have an approach that has like 3 components where we first model something, then we take the input, and then we generate something, and then we can again generate something, and then in the end we measure learning, and then we realize, oh great, the student learned something. If we did not really evaluate all these components, I wonder what we really learned, why the student learned something. So I think what this paper tells us is thinking about metrics and evaluation is important, and I feel like in today's times where we use the LLMs, how we evaluate and critical thinking about how we evaluate is even way more important than it was.
I think I'm going to repeat what you said just with different words, because I agree. I mean, all of the learning systems that we're working on are essentially trying to help students learn something, obviously, but this is like the end of a long chain of steps with questionable validity sometimes. So we have student learning, and then before that we have some intervention, which is meant to help them learn, according to some theory of change. And then we have some student model, which is used to select an intervention, and then we have a metric that we use to optimize and select a student model. And each of those is a step which may not be valid. And so I would encourage, and I think most people try to do this, measuring as far back in that chain as you can, like as far, as close to the actual learning experience as you can. But that's not always feasible. So that's one thing. And then another thing is taking the validity piece seriously. I think focusing on predictive models, black box models, encourages us to look at predictive validity, but that's a really narrow way of viewing validity. In the measurement world, in the psychometrics world, I think one of my wishes is that there's more intersection with that field and this, because psychometricians talk a lot about reliability, a lot about validity, usually with very simple models, but I still think there are ideas that we can import and should import from that community into this one, and a set of methodologies that come with those. Another thing that I haven't seen, but I would like to see increasingly, is discussion about alternative baselines. With AUC, for example, the implied baseline is a coin flip. So we have 0.5 AUC. You just have total noise, essentially. But and for most prediction problems, that's a reasonable, perhaps a reasonable baseline. You could do a little bit better by using a population average. But in the context of knowledge tracing models, you can actually do better than that and use a baseline that's based on item statistics in the training set. And so if you have items that are, responded to correctly 70% of the time, or 30% of the time, or 10% of the time, you can make predictions about response to those items that have an AUC much better than 0.5 with no information about individual students. And so you can get an AUC of 0.7, 0.8 in some cases with data sets that are widely used, for example, in the PyKT paper, that look like we assume that a high AUC of 0.8 means that model captures something about student behavior, and we can use it to personalize and make intervention selections. But in fact, that's an invalid assumption. And so this is what I mean about the model validity piece. Each validity step needs to be checked. Thank you.
I have lots of ideas about the future of metrics, but only 37 minutes remaining in this discussion. So I'll try to focus on a couple of my favorites, one of which that I think Radek does not get too much into very much in this paper is the interpretation of metrics, not from a technical standpoint, but from a let's say, different user or stakeholder kinds of standpoints. And I think this is constantly an issue in developing student models or teacher models or whatever models we're providing. For example, RMSE that he uses in this paper is an excellent way of selecting models. But if you tell somebody a model has an RMSE of 0.2, they'll have no idea what that means. I don't know what that means because it's not there's no good or bad scale for that. It depends entirely on the problem or on a good baseline, as Thomas mentioned. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in communication and the human factors of metrics that are not the technical aspects, but just what interpretation does somebody get out of a metric when you tell them what the number is, and what they think that number is. And the other aspect is evaluation of what a particular result means, which I think is an exciting future direction that for a modeling step, that where a model gets maybe a very good AUC or a very poor RMSE or whatever the result seems to be from a technical perspective, what does that mean for learning outcomes? So one thing I really love to do in modeling tasks is to imagine that my model is perfect. And what can I do with that model? Or what if the model is completely random guessing? What could I do with that model? And sometimes a perfect model is not actually going to make very much difference. And sometimes I can do an intervention without actually knowing very much at all about the student. And so the real world is usually halfway in between there. But I think there's a lot of exciting stuff to do in the future about treating the accuracy of the model as a kind of like a condition or something to be investigated to determine, like, what is the causal effect of improving the accuracy of a model, and should we care about this or that improvement in accuracy? Maybe it makes a huge difference for students, or maybe it makes very little difference at all. So anyway, those are some of the directions that I think could be very interesting for this work.
Yeah, since I go last this time, I get to piggyback off what everyone else said. So, yeah, I think, number of the lessons that Radek presented in the 2015 paper and repeated some of them in his brief presentation today are extremely relevant in the sense, of course, things have changed a lot, right? Nowadays, we deal with these student models or learner models that are extremely complex, right? On the one hand, we are looking at a set of performance metrics that say, come off some kind of a graphical structure, because the topic the student is learning is made up of a set of concepts that are not really independent of each other, because knowing one concept helps them learn another concept. So this notion of treating every entity as independent does not hold anymore, and we have methods like Bayesian networks, etc., right, and neural network structures, graph neural networks, for example, where we can actually represent and work with these kind of examples. So in that sense, I agree with the point that Tanya, I think, made right away, that nowadays, because we have all these deep learning models and LLMs, etc., we tend to jump into these black box models. We feed in data into it, get a result that looks good, so we just accept it. But I think we have a much bigger responsibility, because we are dealing with learners and students. So accuracy of the model, are we interpreting what the student is doing correctly, is really, really important. So I think some of the traditional methods that we used to use, like graphical representations, reasoning with uncertainty, etc., right? They're equally important, because our decision should take all of those factors into account before we sort of think of an intervention or responding to a student if we are doing this work online. So some of what Radek said then, of course, it's a very different framework nowadays than the one he presented in 2015. But I think those are important things to consider. There are also other issues that I would like us to think about, in the sense that he did point out, and we all know now, that one metric does not sort of satisfy all requirements. So how do we come up with multiple? Now, we could, again, create a deep learning model that produces a number of outputs, but how do we systematically and come up with a theoretical framework where the things that are of interest to us about a student, right, we can actually define metrics that fit each one of those characteristics well, and figure out how to use a combination of those metrics to interpret student learning or student behaviors, or even student performance. So I think that this paper sort of, the implications are very broad and very general, and something that we could pick up on and apply based on what we know nowadays and how we work nowadays, right? Though we may not be using exactly the same methods that they used before.
Thank you, and I think we're going to open up also to the audience for any questions that you might have. So if you have any questions that might be that you'd love to hear some thoughts from our panelists, you can start raising your hands, and I think we might have a mic or two extra, and if not, I will personally run this mic to you. If not, perfect. I'm going to personally run this mic to you. Oh, thank you. Didith is going to pass it off.
Hi, thank you. This is really interesting, and the paper was great. I'm a statistician, so it speaks very much to me which statistics to use to measure things. Actually, so you just mentioned in the last comment 2 issues that I was thinking about. So I was wondering if any of you could expand on these. So, okay, number 1 is that in a lot of cases, a picture tells 1,000 words. So when I teach my regression class, for instance, when it comes to like diagnosing models, there are tests you can do, and there are measures of model diagnostics. Most of the time, I think they're not very helpful. What's really helpful is plotting your residuals, right? And then you could see, okay, where does the model work? Where does it not work? How bad is it? Is it really linear? Things like that, which you can get so much more than just from one number. So I guess question 1 is, in what cases or when or in what way do you think like a single measure like the AUC or RMSE or something is as good or better than a plot? One place might be if you're ranking models. But the part 2 is, the other thing is, you mentioned reasoning under uncertainty. People, and myself included, unfortunately, are always very, very often reporting these statistics. Oh, my model worked better than the previous model or something like that, without any accompanying measure of uncertainty, right? All of these statistics come with standard errors. Now, some of them, maybe there's no known method to calculate the standard errors or to estimate them, but in many cases there are. With RMSE you can. It's an average, right? So that's pretty straightforward. AUC, there's also it's basically also another average. So there's ways of doing that too. So do you think that that could be an important area for growth and improvement, is kind of reporting standard errors, or in what case, maybe some other cases that are relevant. So I'm curious to hear what you all say. So thank you.
I can start, but I don't feel like I have an answer. I feel like I have an answer to there were many questions somehow in your question. Two. So the second one, I do think we should always report uncertainty or standard errors, and I feel like that should be standard to report standard errors in the results. And I think it has become over the past year more and more standards, not only in our community, but also in the NLP and ML communities, that people do ask for confidence intervals or standard errors or standard deviations of the error metric. And so for me, that's not even a discussion. I think that's something we should expect, that it's reported. Now, the first question, I found it very difficult because I do agree, because I do think that the plot with the residuals probably, it always clearly has more information than the AUC. And so you said, is there a case where we should still use the AUC? And I wonder when then maybe I would say it depends on what you want to do with the model and to whom you want to communicate to. Nigel before mentioned how do we interpret results, or how do we communicate to stakeholders. Maybe when I evaluate model and think about how I use them, I would use more detailed graphical metrics, and when I discuss with a teacher or someone, I would use a metric that is maybe aggregate, but that someone can interpret of what's, okay, 0.9 is good. Like, yeah, but that's maybe someone else wants to add.
Yeah, I can add, right? So the thing about AUC is it doesn't really, it combines type 1 and type 2 errors. And in the kind of work that we do, we would like to differentiate the two. Because all of the, I mean, you could do measurement for the sake of measurement, and I'm not sort of knocking that. But most of us are measuring so that we can make decisions, so that we can support the student or provide information to teachers. And therefore, in some sense, breaking down these, or thinking of these metrics in terms of, the first principles concepts that they represent, I think is very important, because those first principle concepts are more explainable. So in that sense, I think it's very useful. Another point you made was about uncertainty. And I think, right, more and more, right, we consider uncertainty less and less, though we are using this information to make decisions. And we have to realize we are making decisions under uncertainty. So quantifying the uncertainty that we see when we use a measure to understand, say, a certain phenomena, I think is very important, because that can strongly influence the decision you make. So again, I'll stop there, but I think these are, the points you made are really good ones, and these are things that we really need to continue to consider as we move forward in this field.
I agree with the uncertainty point. I want to rep again a little bit for the psychometrics field. I can't believe I'm doing this, but here we are. AUC and accuracy and these other sort of global metrics are global metrics in aggregate, right? They weight by default item responses equally. And with a lot of open data sets that are used for building knowledge tracing models, students in those data sets have a very wide range of item responses. You'll have many students, at least I've seen, with a single-digit number of item responses, and you have some students with thousands of item responses. Is making predictions for the students with thousands of item responses more important than making predictions for students with just a few? I mean, I would argue the answer is no. And yet, effectively, we're overweighting those students by a factor, hundreds, orders of magnitude. Another thing that I think we don't do enough in this community is think about uncertainty of predictions at a student level as a function of the amount of data we've observed about individual students. We think about uncertainty again at the model level, at the global level, but in adaptive testing, if you use like an IRT model, for example, you use an uncertainty estimate, the standard error of measurement, to figure out how long the test should be, to select the next items, to figure out the confidence that you can have that you're making a decision with a certain level of reliability. And that sort of student level analysis, I think we could benefit from more of.
I definitely agree with both of the points that you're making, and have kind of a different answer, I guess. The first answer to your second question is, that I think pretty much most of us probably agree that we should be doing more with uncertainty estimation, and also claims about this model is better than that model, which is sometimes just because the AUC has different digits, but not because the confidence intervals would actually suggest that. And I don't know, so the interesting question there is, how do we make that happen? Which I don't have an answer to, but something for the review process next year, perhaps. And the other part about plotting and residuals and things like that is that I think a lot of what we do, as Gautam mentioned, we are often making models so that we can make decisions, which means often we are reporting metrics that Radek refers to as qualitative, but I would just say discrete, maybe, metrics. And for those, My 2 minutes of thinking about it opinion is that confusion matrices are the residual plots of discrete metrics, and that we should report those a bit more. And certainly when I'm modeling tasks like that, I love to look at a confusion matrix because I think that gives you a lot of the information about where the mistakes are being made. I think sometimes there's hesitancy to take probabilistic predictions and boil them down to, say, yes or no, or ABC kind of categories, because you're inherently losing information, and that doesn't seem right. And so I would rather have an RMSE or an AUC or something conceptually for that reason. But again, going back to the systemic perspective of how we actually use these models, eventually if you're going to have to turn that model into a decision that is categorical, then I would love to see more of the confusion matrices reported in papers so we can see when the model is actually applied and you would have to put your money where your mouth is and put a student into a category, for example, what are the types of errors that it would make?
I'm going to piggyback and actually just ask a follow-up question because I can, and I'm holding a mic. But I'm curious your all thoughts. If we are thinking about different metrics for different stakeholders, I think was a theme that was in a couple of your answers of thinking about like what is the right measures for the people that we're trying to communicate this information to. Of course, different metrics, if you're reducing a really complex plot down to a single number, sometimes you are throwing away information. So how do we think about that from the perspective of making sure that we are communicating to stakeholders so that way they understand without miscommunicating in that having something important that is then left out from the metrics that we're making decisions from? I'm curious if you have thoughts of how do we navigate that space, especially thinking about kind of the practical application of what we might be building. Any thoughts?
Yeah, you said not, it was interesting because you said that we don't leave important things out. And what has happened to me in my experience when I now think about students and teachers as stakeholders, and we have worked a lot on explainability. So your model makes a prediction and you want to explain the prediction. And my experience is actually exactly the other way around, that we tend not to leave important things out, but we tend to give way too much information because we are very excited about our models and our findings and the metrics, and that we forget that maybe as a teacher I don't need to know about all these details. So for example, we had deep learning models where we could say, okay, which features influenced the prediction? And of course, as you could imagine, no teacher wants to know importance scores, because it's our plots with importance scores or very detailed plots, and we really had to do many studies to figure out what information do they know, what information is even relevant and actionable. So also when you communicate a metric or a result, you have to think, okay, how much do they know such that they can how much do they need to know such that they can trust, but what information is even relevant and will even influence their decisions. And so it's not really an answer to your question, but it's just in my experience, I think for our evaluation, it's super important that we have the very detailed metrics and we make decisions on them and we can interpret our models. But then it's a whole other type of research when you work with teachers and say, what is important for you to know in the classroom? What do you really want to do? And how can my model help you do this? And how can my predictions help you? And then how do I now communicate about my model? So.
Yeah, I would emphasize that, when you work in classrooms, you put educational technology in classrooms, you no longer have just a technical system, but a socio-technical system with users who only have certain levers available to them. The first paper that I ever presented at EDM was on predicting students dropping out of school. And I worked at a big student information system, and we made predictions at a very high AUC. That was the metric we used. And so we were working with counselors who we were trying to help understand, like, well, who should you intervene with? Who is at risk? Who needs help? And we had a great system for identifying who these students were, but had no recommendation of what to do. And they were like, this student is not going to graduate. We have no idea why, which is not good enough in that context at all, right? It might be actually worse because you're like giving them like a mechanical like bias system, essentially, effectively. And so we worked like iteratively with counselors to think about, you know, what information would be helpful. You know, they have a set of interventions available to them that's funded by the school district or the state. How do we like match students with intervention categories like their attendance interventions or behavioral interventions or academic interventions, and ended up building supplementary models that gave risk scores that kind of attributed the risk to those individual categories and then sort of left the last mile up to counselors. But just to highlight that just the risk alone, even with excellent AUC, was really inadequate for that context.
I just wanted to add that I don't know the answer at all, and I'm not sure that we really do as a community. So I hope there will be some papers in future EDM of studying the interpretations that different people have of metrics.
Yeah, I'm also not sure how much of an insight I have, but the one thing I have is that these numbers or metrics are really aggregated numbers. And when we communicate with others, you know, it's not sufficient to tell them, hey, this was, you know, you passed or you failed, or this was good or this was bad. Even if you do that, even if you communicate that, you're obligated to provide the reasons why. So really there is, you know, what we're dealing with is some kind of a knowledge structure based on which we've computed these aggregated metrics. But once we have those metrics, it is contingent on us to figure out, right, how do we explain why we got that particular number? And for that, it seems at least, you know, a lot of the work we do, we like to think of there being an underlying structure, right, from which these metrics were derived. And once you derive the metrics, trying to go back and figure out what parts of the structure contributed to that number, I think are very, very important, and that's how we communicate or make decisions. For example, if this were an online system and I was thinking about what should we tell the student next?
I think there's a question in the audience. If we could run a...
Hello.
There we go.
So I have kind of a two-parter. I think the first piece is, you know, a lot of metrics that you hear about are metrics about model performance, but the model is fit to data, and something you don't always hear a lot about is like, how do people explore and quantify properties of the data? Because especially as these models get more and more complex, they're going to do a better job at capitalizing on these weird aspects of the data you may not have looked at. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. But then also, to kind of join the bandwagon of praising psychometrics, they do a lot of simulation studies. And I think simulation studies aren't super prevalent, at least in a lot of the literature I've seen about model building. So what kinds of things could we do as a community to make people want to do more simulation studies and encourage them to do that? Because they're very valuable as sanity checks, even if a lot of the times they are a bit simplistic. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that.
It's a dilemma, right? Because we're dealing with very, very complex phenomena. It's humans we are dealing with and trying to model, you know, either their behaviors or the performance, which depends on many, many different factors. So yeah, you know, as computer scientists or as engineers, we would really like to build models, but the point is, you know, this also is a sort of a thought that I had when I was reading Radek's paper, because his experiments were all based on simulated data. And the first question that someone might ask is, how good is the simulation data in comparison to real-world data? Now, I think more and more, you know, with this notion of world models and all this, you know, huge amounts of computing power that we have, we can use a combination of model-based and data-driven methods to build more accurate models, and therefore our simulations are likely to produce more effective data based on which we can validate some of our models. I think it's very important to do that, but there is this one step in between that we cannot neglect if we are using simulated data to test our metrics. At least that's my point.
I want to agree with Gautam about the complexity of simulating a learner and about that it's a crucial, I think it's an interesting step, but it can only be one step in between, maybe I guess as you thought it, as a quick test whether the method is even under assumptions doing what I want. And I think there has been, so we wrote a literature review about simulated learners about 2-3 years ago, so there have been many papers on simulated learners, and what I found there more concerning rather than not using simulated data is more like using simulated data and having not really an idea. Like I think 80% of the papers had no real validation, or having no idea of how good your simulated data is, how close is it even to an actual learner. So I found that more concerning, but then we also looked at it in very different use cases. And I do agree with you that maybe if it's as a simple first test whether method is under some assumptions even doing what you want, then maybe we need to be less worried whether it really simulates real learner data.
Yeah, I think it's very challenging to simulate from scratch, but there's one area that I think we could do a lot more of in this field that accomplishes some of the goals of simulation in psychometrics, which is often to show the properties of an estimator under different conditions, and to try to recover ideal estimates that you know to be sort of ground truth. And even though I think it's, I don't want to say risky, but sometimes ill-advised to simulate students, for example, to try to simulate learning from scratch and then try to model that. I think there's a lot more that we could be doing with large data sets where we accomplish some of those same goals with subsampling to say, we have this very large data set for one situation, but realistically, a lot of the time we're going to have a much smaller data set, or we want to learn something about this particular modeling method. And we can use real data and accomplish some of those goals with random subsampling in different ways to see, what is the effective data set size, or number of participants versus number of samples, and some of the things Radek talked about in there about generalizing across knowledge components or populations and things like that, which we can do with real data, but just not using all of the data. So I'm hopeful that there will be more in this community with that approach to some of those same goals in the future. And then maybe that somehow also accomplishes a little bit of your first part of the question about how to understand more about the data as well through these kinds of numerical approaches.
I guess I'll do a +1 to what I think is there are many goals of simulating a student potentially, and some of them are perhaps laden with risk or overconfidence that you're going to do it well. But I think the value, at least as I understood the question, and certainly what I've seen working with organizations, is one of the values is that you can essentially stress test your inference process with, sure, an oversimplified model of a student, but if you have a forward model of a student, generate some data, make the kind of downstream inferences that you like to make about, essentially the status of a skill, for example, and then an intervention of, assignment of an intervention. If you can't do that even with an oversimulated version of a student, it seems like your chance of doing it well with a human being is lower. And so that feels like an important validation step for a lot of learning design and for organizations that are deciding how many practice questions to give, that are both helping students practice and also collecting behavioral information that you can use to infer the sort of status of a skill. You can make product design decisions based on that sort of model that feel like at least directionally helpful in design, even if they're not sort of scientifically grounded in what human beings do.
Hi. So with the ubiquitous access to natural language interfaces and creating models, we're kind of seeing stakeholders take a much more active role in the creation of these tools. They have a lot of domain expertise, which is great, but probably not a lot of technical expertise. And how, as we enter this era of like democratized design, do we ensure deep thinking about governance and kind of the epistemic rigor that goes into evaluation metrics when somebody doesn't understand the difference between a confusion matrix and just measuring accuracy, or like whose responsibility is it? How do we ensure responsibility still is a thing as we democratize creation? Any thoughts?
One thought is that, well, first off, it's a very big question that I'm not qualified to answer. But there are some projects that I've seen, I wish I could give you a citation off the top of my head, but I can't, to trying to teach teachers about evaluation. And I think that approach is very interesting because it's not even just about like data mining or machine learning or anything like that, but teachers do a lot of experimentation themselves in classrooms and kind of you see what seems to be working. But they are, even if they're not using AI, they're often creating their own learning materials and experimenting with new types of a curriculum or ways of teaching a particular topic, or trying to learn effective ways from their peers, and none of that is anywhere close to rigorous evaluation. So I think the potential is there to have a really large impact if the problem can be sort of addressed, at least to some extent, even beyond AI-driven learning. But as you mentioned, as that is expanding, I think that will just become more important. So yeah, I would say I mostly just agree. And I do think there's a little bit of work out there about teaching teachers about evaluation methods. It's just, yeah, unfortunately, I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't know either, just when you said teaching teachers about evaluation methods, so what we do at EPFL, we have a Center for Learning Sciences, and what is done now, it's, okay, if teachers who experiment with AI in their courses, you can go and then you can have a consultant that helps you, for example, setting up a study or helps you evaluate. And so that's at university level, so it's also us as professors who teach. I would say if you're not in the field, you don't know about evaluation, right? So it's on a voluntary basis. But I agree with Nigel on how to bring that down. So we do get a lot of requests from teachers at high school level or any level on how to use AI and what to do, and say, oh, I have a lot of idea and I'm doing them. And it's working in my classroom, but many are unsure, and I think there's a lot of work from all our three communities that remains to be done to help on how to evaluate. I think that's a very interesting thought.
I also don't know the answer, but I appreciate the question. I think it's a really important one. I am, I guess, a little bit skeptical that it's possible to do a good and thorough job at helping sort of every teacher that's going to use AI also be a rigorous evaluator. And, but I do think it would be helpful if this community encouraged teachers to be more skeptical of AI, because I feel like, to me, that's kind of like the one-line summary of what doing evaluation is, in a way. Like, not just trusting that this is going to work, but be open to making observations about how it's not working, and then refining the approach. So I guess that's what I would propose. I mean, there's a sort of a worldwide bandwagon effect with AI, and it's good in a way because it does democratize the creation ability, and teachers and researchers can think like, oh, I had an idea over lunch, let me try it out, and it's great. But as everybody here knows, like, it doesn't always work. And so just communicating that piece, like, sure, it works 70% of the time, or 90% of the time, or 99% of the time, but it doesn't always work. So, like, always be on the lookout for where it doesn't, and think about how to improve your design based on that. To me, it's kind of like a natural and easy to communicate version of like proper evaluation.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time, so I'll just make a short statement. I think the key answer to this is researcher-teacher partnerships, right? So that's the way to go, and I think everyone implied that.
Thank you, and we are running out of time, but there is one last thing that we need to do within this session, so before anyone runs away, let's first thank our panelists for their great thoughts. So first, thank you. And then finally, the last thing I'm going to hand over to Gautam to announce the winner of this year's Test of Time Award. So we can do either a drum roll or otherwise. And the next roll.
Okay, so I'll tell you a little since I'm sorry. I'll just briefly introduce the award. I mean, it was done before, but I'll tell you how we decide the award. So the winners for the last 5 years form the committee that then chooses the award for the next year. So this year we had Michel Demaris was the chair. He's in his 4th year. So he stays 1 more year and then rotates out. I am the freshman. I mean, so I got the award in 23. So I'm a first year, and then there are 3 others. Cristobal, who was on his 5th year, and he's going to rotate out, and then Kalina and Tiffany Barnes. So next year, I think Cristobal will rotate out, and Radek will join the committee. So that's how we decide. So we went through, the way we choose the award winner is we look at, as was pointed out earlier, we look at the EDM conference, the Journal of EDM, other related EDM journals, and pick a set of papers that are highly cited. And then we just don't decide on, we don't just decide the highest cited paper is going to get the award. We then review each one of the small subset of papers that have got selected, and then go through a discussion process based on which we choose the winner. So having said that, this year's winner is How Deep is Knowledge Tracing by Mohammed Khaja, Robert Lindsay, and Michael Moser. So I'm hoping that they will not miss next year and be here to give the Test of Time Award talk.
So again, thank you all for attending, and I hope you attend next year's to hear one of the authors hopefully talk more about that work, and we'll be able to see more of how that's impactful. Continue all of you to do impactful work, so hopefully 8 to 10 years or 8 years from now or more, we'll see your work being presented here. But thank you all for attending the session. We really appreciate your attention, and thank you again to the panelists for your thoughts and all of your insights on this area of work. So thank you one more time.